and it went so well. It was so fun. It caused such a debate. We thought, let's try it again before another 15 years elapses. And here he is, Republican Congressman from Texas and Republican Conference Chairman. This is big.
Jeb Henserling, so good to have you on the show this morning.
Good morning.
I was wondering why I was getting hives.
Mika gets hives every 15 years when we have a Republican on here.
No, I definitely want to hear. I want to try this again.
Okay, so we're going to try this again. And Congressman, we'll give you 1 second. Mika, though, why don't you just set us up with the news?
President Obama is expected to hold a White House news conference on the ongoing talks to raise the debt ceiling at 11 o'clock Eastern time today. The president is telling congressional leaders he wants to see a deal in the next 36 hours, calling it decision time. If not, he says, lawmakers will have to return to the negotiating table this weekend. It comes as the Wall Street Journal reports Plan B emerges on debt. The Journal and others say that Harry Reid is embracing Mitch McConnell's backup plan that would allow the president to raise the debt ceiling in 3 installments.
Why don't we stop there and go to Congressman? Hey, Jeb, would you support that, this McConnell plan?
Joe, we're still working on Plan A, B, or C. This kind of strikes me as Plan X, Y, or Z. The plan I want to see, frankly, is the president's plan. I mean, let's face it, House Republicans voted against the $1 trillion stimulus plan. We voted against the $2 trillion Obamacare plan. We voted against the 24% run-up in garden variety government in 2 years. And now the president expects us to raise taxes to pay for his spending spree. The president has given us a speech. The president ought to put a plan on the table. If he doesn't like our plan, where's his plan? He's had the advantage of having...
What's your plan?
Our plan is our budget. We put forth a budget that has been scored by the Congressional Budget Office. I mean, and frankly, a stunning rebuke as I see it from the Congressional Budget Office. The head of it, a Democrat, said to the president, I mean, we can't estimate a speech. We can only estimate a plan. And so the president has obviously been behind closed doors, but what he hasn't shown to the American people beyond a speech with class fair war rhetoric in it, where's his plan to deal with the debt crisis that frankly many of us believe he caused?
Is it possible, sir, that he's waiting for the Republican Party and leaders in the Republican Party to perhaps say that they will give a little bit on tax loopholes or some sort of revenue-enhancing points to it? I mean, if they're not going to give on everything, why should the president lay out a plan?
Well, number one, Mika, in our budget, we had fundamental tax reform. We got rid of all the tax loopholes. The president has signaled out two that he doesn't like. We would get rid of them all in order to bring tax rates down, more competitive to create jobs. He's pointed to 2 he doesn't like, and we're fearful that they will simply fuel his spending spree. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, 100% of the challenge has been on the spending side. Frankly, 100% of the solution ought to be on the spending side. And if the president talks about having to eat your peas, I can assure you it is contrary to the Republican DNA to raise the debt ceiling. Now, we're willing to do it. Nobody wants to see America not keep its current commitments, but the president's going to have to cut up the credit card.
John Heilman's here. John.
Congressman, yeah, it's obvious you guys obviously did vote for your budget, and that's a commendable thing to have done. And I think the question, though, is not about the long-term budget, because that's really not what's supposed to be attached to a debt ceiling vote. And I think the question is in the short term whether you think that there's a way, given the current impasse, for there to be a package that we can get to where both sides give a little bit and get to something that still gets some kind of reduction, so whether it's a $2 trillion number, or a $4 trillion number, or a $1 trillion number. Is there something that Republicans can see their way where they can give something to the president on the revenue side or not?
Well, again, I don't agree with your framing of the issue. Clearly, we don't want to see August 2nd come and current commitments aren't made current. But even Moody's issued a statement last night that simply says if we kick the can down the road, our bond rating is going to go down anyway. I mean, 72 times Congress has increased the debt ceiling, and not surprisingly, 72 times the debt has gone up. We are giving in the fact that we are willing to vote to increase a debt ceiling, contrary to what many of us came here to do. So is there still a possibility for a plan? I hope so.
Jeb, you know, you don't really have too much of a choice in talking about that debt ceiling. I've been very critical of Barack Obama's spending over the past 2 years, but George W. Bush and Republicans took a $155 billion surplus, turned it into a $1.4 trillion debt, took a $5.7 trillion national debt, turned that into an 11.5 national debt. The economy's gone down. Revenues have dried up over the past 2 years. You know, a lot of this debt is because of what Republicans have done over the past 10 years. So it's not just Barack Obama's debt. You know that, right?
Well, listen, absolutely. There have been previous Republicans in Congress ran up a credit card, too. Now, I must admit, I think we're rank amateurs compared to the president and the previous Democratic Congress, but I concede the point.
As a matter,
he hasn't had the time.
Hold on. As a matter of math, that is not accurate, but I do want to ask you this question, though. And I understand. I voted against raising the debt ceiling back when they wanted to raise it to $5 trillion. I understand it not being in your DNA, but I knew it was going to pass when I voted against it. The fact is, we're up against a point here that you and I both know is very critical. This could cause a serious problem if you got a $4 trillion deal. If you could get a $4 trillion deal from the president, if you threw in all of those tax loopholes, why not put that on the table?
Joe, it is on the table to clean out the tax code, to get out the tax preferences, the loopholes. But we need to bring down rates. That will be pro-growth. That will bring in more revenue. What we don't need to do is raise marginal taxes on the American people. And Joe, when you talk about we know our back's against the wall, listen, there's no more wall left. I mean, again, Moody's is saying if you don't do something about the problem today, your debt rating is going down anyway. At some point, you got a moral responsibility to quit kicking the can down the road.
I understand. I've been talking about it for 15 years. I understand. I also understand, though, a deal's got to be done. That is the reality. So how do we get from where we are now? Because the president, I haven't heard the president say the only way he's going to agree to a deal is by raising marginal tax rates. I haven't heard that. He's been talking about the tax loopholes, and like you said, he's only talked about two. Why don't Republicans lead? I mean, I think the Ryan plan saves or increases revenue by about $1 trillion with these tax loopholes being closed. Why don't you lead with that?
Joe, I don't know how to say it. I think I've said it three times on the program. It's in our budget. It is part of the negotiations. If the president wants to embrace, we want to do fundamental tax reform. We believe it would be pro-growth. We think it would be good for jobs. We think it would be good to help reduce the deficit. I don't know how many other ways to say yes.
Let's try and there's a disconnect here, where you say you guys have something in the budget. I think, is it the fact that it does not bring in revenue, that it does not actually use...
What does bring in revenue?
I mean, why is there a complete disconnect, and he feels he said something 3 times?
The Ryan budget has passed 3 times. I mean, the Ryan budget's passed, and they do get rid of, Paul Ryan gets rid of a lot of these tax loopholes. That is a reality. And on the other side of it, Al Sharpton, one of the great frustrations for Republicans, because you hear that only Democrats are negotiating here. But the Democrats haven't passed a budget. They haven't passed a budget in the Senate. The president haven't passed a budget. All Democrats have done on the budget front is demagogue the Ryan plan and win a special election.
On the budget. I'm talking on the budget. On the budget. But in terms of these negotiations, we can have different opinions, but not different facts. The fact is, the president said, fine, let's quit kicking the can down the road. Let's have a big bargain. It was the Republicans that said, we're not going to talk to you as long as taxes are on the table. They didn't say what the congressman just said, that we want to put only these loopholes on the table, or we only want to discuss this. They said no talks if taxes are on the table. So you can't come back now and redo what happened. They're the ones that said, no, we don't want to talk about it.
And Jeb, I think that's what we're trying to sort through here, because there are Republicans in Washington, D.C. that have said, Grover Norquist has said it, the closing of tax loopholes, these tax loopholes would constitute a tax increase. So it sounds like this morning you've said the official position of the Republican Party in these negotiations are all the tax loopholes that were passed under the Ryan plan are part of part of what Republicans are offering up to the president.
Again, Joe, what we want to do is we want to clear out the tax code, but we want to do it by bringing down rates. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. If we're going to be competitive, if we're going to bring jobs to America at a time where unemployment is at the worst extended duration since the Great Depression, we need to bring it down. We believe ultimately that's going to be pro-growth. We believe that that's going to bring in more revenue to the government. But we want to use that revenue not to fuel more government spending, but we want to use it to bring rates down to create jobs.
That's the disconnect.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
That's the disconnect.
Just for the help, just to help the viewers, that's the disconnect that we're having here. Is you're saying, yes, we'll clean out the loopholes, but in exchange, we're going to lower the tax rate. So I guess the next question is, the logical question is, okay, let's say in these negotiations, you give up something you don't want to give up. Let's say the president brings Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security to the table. You've got a chance. I'm just talking about you, not the party. You've got a chance to cut $4 trillion from the national debt over the next decade. Do you say, all right, I don't like it, but we will keep tax rates the same, the marginal tax rates the same for individuals, for corporations, and we'll get rid of these tax loopholes. We won't lower it. We'll get rid of the tax loopholes. Would you do that?
Well, I'm not sure I quite understood the math of what you're doing, and unfortunately, we're probably not going to get this thing negotiated here. But even the president himself, I believe it was on Monday, said that Medicare is going broke and tax increases alone aren't going to save it.
Okay, what
the president of the United States said.
Jeb, let me stop you. What did? Because you know what? I'm just a dumb country lawyer. I can understand why you might not. Maybe I'm inarticulate at times. So let me explain it again. If rates stayed the same and didn't do what the Ryan plan did, if rates stayed the same, didn't go up, didn't go down, but we got rid of these tax loopholes, is there room for compromise there? If the president throws in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, $2 trillion in cuts in those entitlement programs?
Well, the devil's in the details. But again, if you're going to leave tax rates the same, one man's loophole is another man's tax deduction. If it's a net increase in taxes, no, it is not something that Republicans favor. Again, look at the CBO analysis. All the problem is on the spending side. We've gone from 20% of GDP to 25% on our way to 40%. Tax revenues are temporarily down due because of the recession, but CBO says this tax code will produce its traditional 18.5% of revenues. We want to see the president put forth a plan on the spending side, and so far we've seen a speech.
All right, very good. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Richard, that was the disconnect here, is that Paul Ryan's plan brings down the tax rates, gets rid of these loopholes. Maybe the compromise is you get rid of the loopholes, you keep the tax rates the same, you don't raise them. So Republicans then say you're raising the tax rate, you get rid of the loopholes, you raise that revenue. Claire McCaskill said yesterday, maybe $1 trillion in revenue, and you get 3-to-1 cuts. That's a pretty good deal for conservatives, right?
It's a pretty good deal, but unlikely to be acceptable. I think the odds are against it, which is why some version of the McConnell plan is probably much more likely, because we've only got now 2 weeks. We've got a gun to our heads. So I think we're probably going to get something much more modest than that to simply get us through this. And that's going to be a post-2012 election.
Which is actually an economic nightmare.
That was lame.
Did not take this, not take this opportunity to get $4 trillion